when in 1901 there was published the Jewish Encyclopedia in 12 bulky volumes in this country, containing virtually the entire substance of Jewish thought, of Jewish law, of Jewish philosophy. They dealt with every subject under the sun that they could lay their hands on. Jewish music, Jewish architecture, naturally Jewish history, philosophy. There wasn't a single entry in the Jewish Encyclopedia at that time on anything to do with Jewish medical ethics. Nothing on abortion, nothing on euthanasia, let alone on transplants and subjects that have now become so commonplace. When 70 years later, the not Jewish Encyclopedia, but the Encyclopedia Judaica, the successor work, was published in Israel in 1971, it did already feature quite a few entries on Jewish medical ethics. I ought to know because I contributed most of them. But what is, I think, far more striking, and was to me an amusing experience, I feel I ought to share with you because there is a certain significance to it. A few years ago, there was held in England a Church of England Synod. That's the governing body of the Church of England. And up on top of the agenda at that time was the subject of homosexuality, and especially in relation to the ordination of priests, whether they ought to be allowed to get their jobs or to hold their jobs. And before that synod took place, with this theme of homosexuality featuring very prominently on their agenda, the London newspaper, The Times, approached me and asked me to contribute an article on the subject of homosexuality from a Jewish point of view. Obviously, I wouldn't do it from an Anglican point of view. I couldn't. And didn't quite suit me, because it's a thankless subject to begin with. Whatever I would have to say is not likely to be the most popular things that have to be said on homosexuality. And on top of that, come into a conflict situation with the Church of England, with whose head and whose leaders I have very, very cordial personal relations. It didn't suit me either. So I thought I'd use an excuse to the Times and tell them it's not part of my speciality. As a matter of fact, my book, Jewish Medical Ethics, doesn't refer to homosexuality at all. But I thought before I do that and tell the Times that I'm not the competent person to ask, at least let me look up what has been written on the subject from the Jewish point of view, and I looked up in the Encyclopedia Judaica under the heading homosexuality. And there's a sizable entry there on Jewish views on homosexuality. And you can imagine my surprise when I found at the bottom of it that I'd contributed it. So my excuse was gone for telling the Times that I'm not a specialist in this field. And I'm glad to say I got away with it. I contributed the article. It was quite well received. I did not fall out with the Church of England. But it's an illustration of recent developments in the popularity of Jewish medical ethics that it is now found in standard works dealing with Jewish thought and Jewish scholarship. Now, I wanted to use this as a basis for my theme this evening, which is to deal with what Halacha has to say about public responsibility to provide national health care, in order to set the stage for making a major admission. I feel, in a sense, as lonely in dealing with this subject and as bereft of sources that I could easily consult and assemble and then distill and present to you, as I felt when I first started on Jewish medical ethics in the middle 1950s. Because the truth of the matter is that our source material on that subject, on the relationship of the state to the provision of health care, is exceedingly sparse. There are very good reasons why we have so little source material on this subject. To begin with, Jewish medical ethics developed by way of responsa, rabbinic responsa, given to those who inquired for the Jewish attitude on subjects of concern to them. So by and large, the whole field of Jewish medical ethics is a compilation of authentic answers given by leading rabbinic scholars to inquiries submitted to their judgment. And the result is that the whole focus of Jewish medical ethics, as far as the major sources are concerned, is based on the kind of people who ask questions, which is patients, and today an increasing number of patients who care to be treated in accordance with Jewish religious prescriptions, or doctors who want to be guided, and again, thankfully, a growing number of doctors who care to act in accordance with Jewish moral instructions. But in each case, the questions come from individuals in the overwhelming majority of cases. Here's a patient, he wants to know, should he or should he not submit to a certain treatment and so on, from a religious or moral point of view, or a doctor, should he administer this or that form of therapy, and an answer is provided. It eventually finds its way into print in massive tomes of rabbinic responsa, and that is the ultimate and fundamental basis on which attitudes gradually emerge and crystallize on the authentic Jewish view dealing with medical ethics. Now, so far at any rate, governments haven't asked rabbis for any opinions. Not even the Israeli government, or perhaps least of all the Israeli government. And the result is there are very, very sparse sources dealing with decisions that are taken at social level, at governmental level, or indeed at professional level as a whole, as a group, as distinct from the individuals who submit questions, receive answers, and that is the bread and butter, as it were, of Jewish medical ethics. That is one plain reason why there is as yet very, very little source material, rulings that have been given, attitudes that have begun to crystallize on matters that have, to a very, very small extent, only received intensive study, treatment, and therefore presentation.